of looking at our regulations and trying to find the ones that are right. You know, when a small business owner goes to open up a business in the state, they have over 700 forms that they have to wade through. They don't have to fill out all 700. And the previous administration was very excited when they put together Michigan Business One Stop, because there was a clearinghouse where there were 700 forms. What we tried to say at
just to be clear to viewers, every business doesn't have to fill out the 700 forms.
Right, correct.
It depends on, it's probably a set of 20 to 50 of those 700 forms.
But you have to wade through them.
Yes.
And so what our perspective was at that time was that's good that there's a clearinghouse, but let's look at the 700. Do we need 700 different forms? Does form need to be different for somebody who's establishing a barbershop versus somebody that's establishing something else, you know, in their district?
I actually looked at that Business One Stop when I was starting out on the campaign trail, and I decided, well, let's go through a couple different standard industry classifications on it. And I own a management consulting company. That's what I do. I'm an independent consultant. And I said, well, okay, let's walk through these steps to figure out how many forms I have to fill out if I were to go off and set up a shop that was just designed to help out and support management consulting. And because I'd want a water fountain in it, that's where a lot of the extra forms come in. It's actually around the watershed and protecting our watershed, which is very important here in Michigan. But there's got to be a way to rationalize the forms there and still produce the expected results. I mean, you've been in legislature long enough to know, and I've experienced it as well in here, that a lot of times we'll put out kind of Band-Aid legislation that's a bunch of one-offs. And sometime along the line, somebody's got to come together and integrate all these legislation and look at it from in our case, a customer experience perspective.
Absolutely.
And businesses, if you treat businesses as customer, you have a totally different approach to these forms than we currently have, and as exemplified as to what you see in the Michigan Business One Stop.
One of the things as a business advocate that's frustrating is that it's not as though doing that is impossible, and it's not as though other states and those around us, particularly Indiana, haven't employed those types of strategies as well. So it's not as though it's impossible.
No.
And so, you know, I can tell you that we at the Small Business Association really applaud the efforts that you're looking at, because we think that there's a lot of room of improvement in this area that will really help people invest back into the state, and it's sorely needed.
So when you kick off a project, Bill, I mean, I'm curious as to, because I've gone through this with a few folks that are going through development projects, and if they're new to the area, there's kind of a deer in the headlights look as to where do I start. What's been your experience as far as what's your starting point? What are the first steps you take whenever you're considering a development project?
To make sure that, first of all, the property is developable.
Yeah.
So you have to do an examination. You usually do a baseline environmental study to make sure there are no difficulties underneath the ground. You should be examining the presence of wetlands, so that if there are wetlands that are under the jurisdiction of the DEQ, you have to visit with them to how you're going to mitigate them. You've got to then go to the municipality and get your site plan approved. Depending on the size of the wetlands, you may be involved with the EPA as well, because Michigan, although they have delegated jurisdiction, they have shared jurisdiction with the EPA. And I think that if the message from the governor gets down to the regulators, those folks who really have their feet on the ground, that the decisions they make not only affect the development, but the lives of those who may be employed as a result of development. Those folks already have jobs. It'd be nice to expand the economic base of the state.
Yeah, and I kind of feel for some of the folks that are in that regulation, you know, because frankly, a lot of the problems come from the legislature, and they're just going off and trying to enforce it to some degree. And sometimes when they color outside the lines of their responsibility with the regulations, they're really just trying to fill in gaps that may have been exposed because of legislation that didn't maybe cover something in that regard. So I understand where some of that may creep out there, and I know they're trying to protect the environment, but somewhere along the line we have to start rationalizing this. And my big concern, what I've heard from a lot of businesses in the area, it's the uncertainty that really scares the heck out of people, because you don't know what you don't know through the process. You don't know what you're going to discover on the land, and where that may go down in the rabbit trail in regards to forms and studies. And And if you're looking, I mean, one thing businesses like to see is stability. They want to be able to manage expectation. They want to be able to sit there and say, okay, this property cost me $400,000 to purchase, whatever. I know I'm going to be developing on it property that's going to make this property valuable in excess of, you know, $10 million or whatever the case may be. They can calculate what that return on investment is, and when you're investing significant amount of capital, you want to be very secure with how you're going off and investing that money.
In many cases, you have a fiduciary responsibility to be careful. So
you're doing it for other people's money. You're doing it for
Absolutely.
the employees in your company to make sure you're not insolvent and they're out on the streets because they don't have jobs because you made a poor economic decision. I mean, that's big responsibility.
Senator, when it comes to licensing too, you know, there's some legislation that's been introduced over in the House as it deals with liquor licenses, but I think it could be broadened to other licenses. The general concept is that if a certain, you know, when the licensee comes in to get an application for the license, a shot clock turns on, you have a certain amount of time, the regulators have a certain amount of time to grant the license. If they don't meet that time, let's say it's 3 months, 4 months, or whatever is reasonable, a temporary license would then be issued. And then another shot clock starts. They have another 3 months or whatever that time is. And if they still can't act, if the regulator can't act on that license, then it automatically goes into place. We have to start to find tools to put into place to really incentivize the regulators to be a more customer-oriented type.
That's the key word.
Approach.
We need to, in general, as a state, we need to be more customer service oriented.
Right.
And anything we can do to help facilitate that, I'm very eager to do. And what would you think? And we'll just throw this out as one of the possible deliverables that we're talking about out of this initiative, is that you would have a dashboard. Anytime you want to come to Michigan and do business, like you go maybe to the Michigan Business One Stop, it would look a little bit different. You would actually sign in with an account and say, hey, I'm going to go off and do a project inside the state of Michigan. You log in and it says, okay, you're this type of business, you start here. Here's your starting point, and you would actually have a little flow diagram that would say you are here through each step of the process, like you get when you're doing online transactions for banking. And it actually walks people through it. Imagine if we had that for expectation management out to facilitate our businesses. It would start looking, for me at least, coming from the out. If I were a business looking outside of Michigan or even one inside of Michigan, and I'd be sitting there going, I just want to have something that's going to help make it easy for me and figure out where it is. That would start seeming like it, if it was updated on a regular basis based on where you were in the process, something that a lot of businesses would welcome. Is that something that sounds like it might make sense?
I think absolutely, Senator. And the way that I look at it is that I think folks from government, they don't have quite the same perspective on what it is to be a small business owner or somebody who is on the business side. They're worried about selling their products. They're worried about getting into markets. They're worried about turning a profit.
Right.
The one thing that they shouldn't have to worry about is their government trying to stifle them every step of the way. So if there's anything that you can do in the way of for that entrepreneur and say, these are the steps that you need to take to get your license or to get your permit, here's some certainty, I think that would ease the mind of the small business owner or the entrepreneur to focus on what they need to focus on, and that is creating jobs and creating products and making
as a small business owner myself and dealing with a lot of them, that's all they're looking for is that easy button. Now, when you've had a lot of years of experience going off and going through this, a lot of this stuff is kind of, I know you've probably gone, oh, here we go again. I got to do this, this, and this. Right. You've got it ingrained in you, but how easy do you think it would be for somebody coming in clean to know all the stuff that you know about the development process?
It would help a lot. First of all, it would expedite their ultimately getting to the finish line. And provided that the subjective requirements on the way, those that have to make judgment decisions, don't sit on it too long. And one of the experiences we've had, which is really a negative one, is that when a regulating agency comes very close to the time constraints under the statute, they'll just deny your request. So there should be perhaps some body other than the courts, which are very expensive to go through, to assess whether or not those jurisdictional exercises have been appropriate.
Well, what are your thoughts about one of the approaches to taking this? If you've got somebody that's earned the kind of a history of going off and doing economic development projects in a responsible manner inside the state, they get to go through the fast lane. And then if somebody's new, they may have a little bit of extra help or training wheels through the process until they create a history of actually demonstrating that they understand. So, I mean, if you're building 400 McDonald's franchises on it, well, it's the same basic layout every single time you're going off and doing it. The same basic plumbing, concerns, everything else, same basic permitting restrictions, everything else like that. You're not really worried about them not dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes to making sure that the reasons for those permits in the first place are actually met, making sure that we're environmentally safe, making sure that you understand that you've got the proper drainage, all that kind of stuff. So kind of the fast track idea, does that make sense?
Absolutely, and we do that right now, in a sense, with the Department of Agriculture. Farmers have the ability to go if they are using generally accepted agricultural management principles in their farm, then they basically have a self-permitting type model.
Right.
And so it allows the farmer to take the onus on himself to adhere to those principles, and then he doesn't have a regulator approving it. He's doing it himself. Now he could be audited, and if he's not living up to those principles, then he could be in trouble. But the ultimate premise is that he's innocent until he's proven guilty, not that he's guilty until he proves he's innocent. And that's what our country is founded on, and we've got to get back to those basic fundamental foundations as a state government, as local governments, and really as a federal government, to give the people the liberty and the freedoms that they're that are theirs.
Yeah,
so
just that simple concept as we go through this would really change the dynamic of doing business in Michigan quite a bit.
I think so, and I think it would encourage people to invest, encourage people to come, and help people to be successful.
Well, as this initiative goes forward, what I'm working on right now is establishing benchmark data as far as timelines are concerned for all the different 700 forms you're talking about on the Business One Stop, and actually I want to break it down systematically and compare them to one another, see which ones are redundant, which ones are overlapping, which ones where maybe we got a gap in there that actually needs to get filled in some areas. But actually systematically go through it and start keeping track of where we currently are as a business from a business environment perspective. And then once we get that done, sit down with business leaders like yourself where we can go off and identify what do you think is a reasonable target for us to go off and achieve, and then identify all the different roadblocks that get in the way for us achieving that. And if we need to get rid of those roadblocks via legislation, then we'll do that. If it's just a matter of maybe having a few tools that actually help businesses get through the process a little bit better, we can maybe approach that as well.
That would help.
I'd really recommend too that you would sit down with Rob Niederhood, who's the deputy director over at LARA. I know that they're undertaking similar initiatives, looking at all of the different regulations. I think I met with him on Monday. There are 17,000 different regulations in the state of Michigan. Well,
we're running out of time here. I just want to wrap up, but that's a great place to start, and we got a lot of work to do on this. This is not something that's going to happen in 2 weeks or not. This is something we got to be very systematic and persistent on. But the end game of all this is that we create an environment where jobs come back to Michigan, and I think that's something we're all looking forward to.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'd like to thank all of our viewers from watching this episode of Lansing from a New Perspective. If you have any stories to tell or have any experiences that you'd like to share with us that we think that fit into this initiative here, please don't hesitate to contact my office. Thank you very much again for watching.